Meanwhile, his glory increased. The victories of Italy and Egypt were long past, but Marengo shed a fresh luster and revived their fame. Bonaparte the consul was also Bonaparte the invincible general. On his return, he met with no more opposition. He dismissed from his counselors the man whom, just after Brumaire, he had deemed indispensable, and whom he no longer saw through the illusion of brotherly affection. He knew he was equal to the civil affairs in which he now busied himself, but to set them on a firm footing needed the cessation of those wars which had for 10 years past absorbed the vigor of the nation. Warlike glory had been gained in abundance. The great need and the general desire was for peace. Peace. And the Treaty of Campo Formio contributed as much to Bonaparte's popularity as his victories did. A peace was demanded worthy of such successes, a universal peace imposed by such invincibility, a peace by which the revolution should be established, liberty assured, and the national territory rendered unassailable. That was the dream of everyone employed on the land, in the workshop, or at the desk throughout France, of bourgeois and peasants alike. It was the dream, too, of many soldiers, and Bonaparte strove in every possible way to realize it. It was at this moment that the royalists resolved to kill him. They did not stand alone, since from before Marengo there had been coalitions between the anarchists and monarchists, between the terrorists of the past and future, between the red and white during the 14 years of Bonaparte's rule. In every plot hatched or abortive, there were apparent in the names discovered and the people arrested signs of that alliance, though they were hardly strong enough to establish its certainty. Were they simply the confidences of ruffians mutually helping each other to avoid the police? Had hate of him grown to such a height that many different murderous conspiracies floated in the air without there being any common authorship between them? Or were the arms which worked for a common cause directed by equally concerting heads? When arch plotters were surprised in conference, was it not likely that they had made alliance and exchanged assurances and guarantees which were only to be fulfilled on the death of the consul at someone or another's hand? He lived under the dagger and was a target constantly aimed at. It was pretended that the police imagined or provoked or even got of the attempts, but for each one on earth there were 100 hushed up and passed over. It was to the interest of the first consul that he should not be known how hotly his life was attacked, lest the hope for security which France had reposed in him and her confidence in his future might be destroyed, and she fell again into terror of those violences from which Bonaparte had delivered her, and which she detested, whether Jacobin or Royalist. On the bursting of the infernal machine so soon after the plot of Chevalier and that of Timofil, Trachy, and Arena, the whole country approved the vigorous action of the first consul and called for more stringent measures and the employment of greater sternness. It was ready to grant him the most extraordinary powers to crush those who troubled the peace, which was so greatly desired. The desirability of external was doubled by such need for internal peace, so that to procure it, the country was ready to sacrifice imaginary political liberties which had proved useless. What would not the country have granted to him who had recalled exiles without undoing the agrarian revolution, which was only now completed by the acquiescence of the emigrants? To him who had reestablished security of property as well as person, to him who was bestowing upon the nation a code of laws regulating the intercourse of private citizens and setting forth in detail every possible situation in which an individual could be placed from the moment of his conception to the time when his inheritors should divide the fruits of his labors. To him who was about to reopen the churches and their services, giving to the priests again a standing in the nation but not a share in the government, and refusing to restore to them their property which had already been sold and divided, but rather compelling their agreement to these changes. To him who in 2 years had achieved the work deemed impossible, reconciling Europe to the revolution, after first reconciling France to herself And there was much opposition made to him, and many hindrances thrown in his way. The tribunes thundered, and the deputies voted against him. Every organized body, which was a creation of the old Revolutionary Assembly, seemed bent on thwarting him. Was it he or they who had changed? Perhaps neither. The misunderstanding was mutual. The Parliament men had wished to put a man of their own at the head of the executive, so they had chosen Bonaparte to protect their interests, but he, on whose actions they had relied without asking for any guarantees, had determined to play the Frenchman as well as the revolutionary, although maintaining the essential spirit of that movement. He would not deprive the nation of those elements which are necessary to her greatness. He refused to become the tool of either the religious or political fanatics, for he recognized it to be equally fanatic to enforce either belief or disbelief. It was plain that the country would be oppressed by such fanatics unless Bonaparte delivered her from them, unless they were disarmed. It was hopeless to reconstruct a powerful France possessed of all the organization necessary to a civilized European country and able to profit by and employ her resources for the consolidation of her powers. Such a France must be founded by means of peace upon the unanimity of the national aim, which had been broken up by internal dissension and safeguarded by religion, the only firm and certain bulwark of the state against anarchic immorality, while trusting her defense to a well-disciplined army, which had learned its business in 8 years campaigning, but was so deeply leavened with patriotism that it would obey no one who showed disloyalty to the country. Supported by the nation who acclaimed him, he determined on a coup d'etat, which was morally, if not legally, defensible. He was the elect of the sovereign people, and he had with him the Senate, who were the trustees of the Constitution. He dispensed with the tribunes and the legislators, but presented himself to seek the consent of the nation. Their answer was to proclaim him consul for life, to increase the powers they had granted to him, and to entrust their future still more implicitly in his hands.